Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Doja Cat Vie. I'm not sure what to make of Doja Cat's star seeming to fade so quickly, even if it might have been predictable given how antagonistic she was towards, well, everyone coming off of 2023's Scarlet. On the one hand, making an abrasive pivot to diss your own audience for only liking the pop sellout songs is kind of high risk, high reward, and Scarlet was just too undercooked and spotty to deliver that outside of decently performing singles, none of which were her best and didn't really play into her playfully hooky weirdness. But then she also went at her labels, Kemosabe and RCA, where again, I was on her side given how they've treated R&B adjacent talent over the years, and even if she was willing to play nicer this time around, the singles don't appear to be moving nearly as well, including two big guest features with Lisa and then with Jack Harlow that just went nowhere. The former was a slam dunk hint. There was no excuse for that. Kind of a shame because teaming up with Jack Antonoff of all people on production for a deliberately 80s inflected throwback, it might be a little obvious, but could make for something pretty fun, which makes this album distinctly frustrating because it feels like a half step forward and yet a full step back, where I can hear the plan to make something work closer to Doja Cat's strengths and the execution was just completely fumbled. Because, if Doja Cat wants to make a love-struck, if somewhat conflicted and exasperated pop-leaning project, she certainly has the sweetness in her singing in order to sell that, but it's also only half of her arsenal when she can be pretty bouncy and goofy, with an actual sense of humor in her more aggressive rapping, even if her actual style is considerably removed from what 80s hip-hop actually sounded like. A cut like Silly Fun careens into this territory remarkably well. But alright, fine, that still requires a certain flair, where at least at first the gestures towards synth-heavy 80s funk and R&B, that's looking in the right direction, including some liberal samples of both Knight Rider and Conan the Barbarian, but I'm also way more familiar with Jack Antonoff's attempts at this brand of funk and R&B on some of his side projects, specifically how, outside the occasional saxophone flourish, how shrink-wrapped, chintzy, or just oily and off the canned guitars and keyboards can sound against those drum machines, not even era appropriate. And when one of the other main producers is Y2K, the beats leaning towards trap can feel leaden and lack much of the distinctly 80s character that might have given those melodic grooves more actual punch. And when the synth sounds so hideously flat like on Make It Up, that is a dire strait indeed. It winds up creating this bizarre palette where Doja Cat easily has the character to fit into either the decadent lush flair of the 80s or its kookier, colorful side, even if as a whole the album is painfully short on quotable ideas or lines that show any level of depth in these relationship scenes. Outside of the exasperation on nearly every out-of-place rap verse, the lack of introspection or flair really starts to drag on an overlong album. But V also doesn't give her much of either. I'd say that's Jack Antonoff's fault given his knack for a more winsome, the 1975-esque atmosphere with the honking sax that clashed so much with the oily synths, like on the lumpy couples therapy, especially when George Daniel himself shows up on the awkwardly washed out and overlong Gorgeous with that weirdly forceful drum machine. But when Doja Cat's not bringing her compositional A game here either, as if she's only ever heard the cheapest slice of mid-80s nostalgia minus any of the big hooks, and Jack Antonoff, he wasn't even on Make It Up or The Runny Mess of All Mine with some truly sloppy and ugly vocal runs, there's no clear culprit. Now, there are a couple cuts where the grooves and tones come together well. The streamlined pulse of Stranger and One More Time, the jittery G-funk trap of Lipstain, even if she sounds a little off in the pocket on the second verse, the bouncy freestyle touches of Happy, the glossy fizzy twinkle of Come Back. I actually think the album ends pretty damn strong, kind of winds up saving it. And I guess the SZA collab Take Me Dancing could work if you like the buzzy blaring of the late 80s and forget Kiss Me More ever existed, but you can also tell from interviews that Doja Cat's passion was more rooted in the uglier squonks of All Mine and Make It Up than anything more slick and refined, and thus it leaves the album feeling weirdly set against itself, where I'm left wondering if the 80s pop swerve was half grudging acknowledgement that it might be better for her long term, but also half label note where RCA and Kemosabe aren't even working the records the way they could, so why bother with the note? It's not bad per se, say, but this is also the third album in a row where I'm not convinced anyone is realizing Doja Cat's potential or range, from her labels to the producers to Doja Cat herself. And it makes for a very frustrating listen and difficult recommendation, especially if you know your 80s pop and R&B beyond the hits, and will find this adaptation of it so jarring and incongruous. It is good for a couple of moments, but I'll say this, if you don't see much more of Doja Cat in the near future, at least in the popular mainstream, I wouldn't be that surprised. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, this one hurts. I really was hoping that this Doja Cat project would be much better, and the combination of tones just didn't really work in the way I was hoping. I was familiar enough with this brand of late 80s, kind of very early 90s touches, and it's just not a flattering blend with what Jack Antonoff brings to the table. Like, you get the ideas are there, but the cooking comes together half-baked, and I didn't think the hooks were strong enough to redeem that, which is not a good sign. It really isn't. But hey, leave your comments down there below. I'm curious where y'all might fall in that. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule, or just yell at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. I get the feeling there's a recession coming. I completely understand. But hey, the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.